Hello, everybody. How we doing? How we doing? Welcome along to Paranormal Monkey Podcast. Hope you're all good. Hope you've had a good Monday and a lovely bank holiday as well. It's going to be a fascinating one. I intended a little while back to do a stream where we were talking about either werewolves or vampires. Got a werewolf guy in. So it's going to be a really, really interesting chat. So, welcome along to Rich. Hi, Rich.
Hello, Justin. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, and just like I say, I mentioned just before we came on, thank you for jumping in at the last minute as well. So thank you so much for that fact that my last guest basically was off poorly. So thank you for jumping in.
Always happy to talk werewolves.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. Before we get cracking, did you want to say a little bit about yourself and where this interest in werewolves particularly comes from?
I have a very boring sort of office job when I'm not doing bizarre podcasts and things like that. But my interest in wolves and werewolves and all that kind of stuff came from when I got involved with heathenry and that kind of stuff, sort of pagan sort of groups. And I thought, oh, well, what I'll do is I'll read everything. And I realized I couldn't because there's too much. So why don't I specialize? I'll pick something narrow and just go deep and start looking at the whole berserkers, which we'll talk about later on. And then I thought, well, okay, well, what's the real story behind it? Not all the myths and all the kind of memes. What's the actual historical or mythological links? And the further I followed this thread, the further it went and the deeper I got into it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can imagine, actually, that obviously in terms of, we're obviously going to focus on the Nordic Scandinavian tradition and the
not necessarily
kind of folklore around.
It's going to be bigger.
I know. Yeah.
No spoilers.
But if you look into the werewolf thing, then the history is far bigger and far greater and goes back much, much further. So, I mean, am I right thinking Romans, Greeks, or is there even further back than that?
Depends how you define werewolves. It gets a bit muddy. And you talked about vampires before then. The further back you go, at least in recorded mythology, vampires and werewolves seem to be the same thing, which makes no sense to our modern day. Okay. But, people then didn't have access to TV tropes and couldn't just tick the boxes as to what. But vampires described as bestial and sort of like, werewolves drink blood and kind of all that kind of, it's all a lot more murky and messy, which makes it more interesting, I think. So certainly it does go quite. There's accounts of people being turned into beasts by gods in the Greek mythology, but even further back, There's a Sumerian story of this goddess who's attracted to the shepherd, and he's not interested in her. She turns him into a wolf, which is the worst thing to be. He can't look after his sheep and that kind of stuff. And there's an account, I think, of Nebuchadnezzar, I think, in that book in the Bible, where he lives like a beast for a year as some kind of punishment. Now, there's a few different interpretations there, but could it be he actually turned into something, or could it be he was everything, I made some bad decisions, so I will take that guilt on me and I'll live terribly for a year just to sort of show that, it's not your fault. It's, it's my fault, and taking that upon themselves. So there's all kinds of weird little threads like that. But I think really with the European stuff, and I haven't really looked too much into the Native American and indigenous stuff over there, because I know there's a ton of stuff over there, but I was starting to look into it, and I realized in just one town and one little specific area, there was so many, just one tiny little tribal area. No, there's just no way. It's so vast, because even then you're like, we think of like the Native Americans as one particular era, but then you've got their precursors, their Bronze Age, and it's huge. It's a huge thing, but still very interesting. But but in terms of the European stuff, that the furthest back we can kind of link it into is what is now modern day Ukraine, but a particular archaeological site. We're talking, let's say, I mean, there's older stuff than that showing people hunting with dogs that are incredibly ancient. There's cave paintings of wolves and things like that are 50,000 years old, but what they believed is impossible to truly know.
And going back, would we recognize as such in these old stories what we know as werewolves?
No.
Or is it very much a different situation?
Well, as I'll talk about, it's the same word being used for very different things as we go through history. It's like the same kind of stuff being stuffed into the same sort of bracket. So the earliest sort of thing is this Ukraine, or this area, this massive archaeological place called Krasnosemarsko, where they found all these sacrificed dogs. What's all that about?
Right.
And the only other thing they found at this sacrificial, and it wasn't just all done in one thing, it was like decades and decades of, they found a body of an adolescent male there as well. And anthropological sort of understanding of that is that at this time, the young men of the tribe would kind of live outside the village, live like wolves, live like dogs, be all crazy. And you graduate from that, you become a man, then you come back into the village, so you're all kind of wild and kind of living like a dog, hunting like the wolves. There's stories of them being naked, but the key point is they have no trade, they have no land, they don't have a wife, so they can be all kind of wild and crazy. And if they die, well, it's okay. It's, we've got more, but it would graduate from that. This idea of them being landless sort of guys living outside the village.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously we've got, humans have had this relationship, I suppose, with wolves over, for going back thousands of years. And obviously, am I right in assuming that initially it was more of a relationship in order to help them with hunting or to deter predators?
It's a dual thing all the way through, because people hated wolves, regard them as pests or pestilence. But at the same time, they thought they were cool. they don't like them, but they kind of copy their behavior, and that kind of, so we don't like wolves because they do this, and they can, but also but if we're going to hunt we notice the wolves hunt in packs. They hunt by the full moon, because it's better light and all that kind of things like that. So people learning from them. So really, and sorry to debunk some of the stuff here, but in my understanding, my perspective, the werewolf thing was never a physical transformation. It was never physically turning into a hairy sort of thing, but it was a spiritual thing. I'm going to take on the power of the wolf, and I'm going to go and hunt, and I'm going to be that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you see that time and time again.
I was going to say, where does a lot of these things come from? And you're like assuming it's taken on the persona of a wolf to help with their hunting, or because they see things that way. I mean, has this been, like I say, it's been mentioned, like saying in Greeks and Roman times and things like that. I mean, how has things developed, culturally, around these different countries?
That's the next sort of phase. This particular tribe in Ukraine were very, very successful, and they migrate and spread out all across Europe, essentially, this particular tribal grouping of people, for various complex reasons. But they spread into Greece, into the Italian peninsula, and so on and so on. And you notice in the Greek mythology, the further north you go in Greece, the more wolf stuff tends to turn up in terms of religion and things like that. There's accounts from, classical Greece times where they say, oh, those crazy primitive people who live up in the north, they all think they turn to wolves. Oh, those poor primitives up in Thrace, which is right near the top of the Greek peninsula. So there's that. And the further north you go, which is obviously closer to that Ukrainian areas, the further north you get to that. And there's the most ancient sort of Greek gods, like Apollo, which you always think of being the golden-haired boy, but he's also the wolf god. He suckled at the teats of a wolf to help him survive and things like that, and so with his son as well. And so there's that kind of things that feeds into the Greek sort of thing. But within the Greek thing, what does come out, the concept of they have the lightest unarmed troops in the Greek warfare, often, basically cannon fodder, but if you survive, then you can maybe go further. And one thing, they were always the citizens, but they were landless and unmarried, so they're kind of the young guys. And one of the things they used to do was to show that they were kind of tougher, and no one knows quite why they would only wear one sandal.
Oh, right.
Don't know why, but that was the thing. But here's the thing, in I'm trying to think which there's a particular Greek myth where a guy comes to a city and they must look out for him because he's wearing one sandal. Is it Jason the Argonauts? I think it is. And they don't recognize him when he turns up. But the whole thing with wearing one sandal, maybe they just think he's one of those cannon foddered guys. Oh, it's not, that can't be the guy we're looking for. He's one of those people. Maybe. So there's that kind of thing. I mean, and of course in Rome you have the Lupercalia, with the big festival. And the Roman Lupercalia festival I found this fantastic blog. It's long gone now, but it said that it wasn't a day. It was a whole month of crazy festivities. It was like, imagine if Halloween lasted a month. It was absolutely, festivals and stuff happening all day. But even the Lupercalia, which is the thing they would do, where they would run through the streets dressed in skins and things like that. Even the Romans said, oh, well, this is this ancient, weird festival. We don't know where it came from. But it's pretty cool, isn't it? It was so popular. They were still doing it into the Christian era. When all of Rome's Christian, until some bishop said, well, that's a bit much. But
it's funny that you mentioned about how the idea that these werewolves, for want of a better word, have been seen as outcasts, because actually that portrayal as the person who is inflicted with this curse of being a werewolf is an outcast and stays away from society.
But you notice that those people living outside the village, they're outcast themselves, and then the sort of those soldiers are kind of like the fringes of society, kind of outcasts and kind of living on the outside. But they served a sort of purpose. They weren't necessarily bad people at this point, but then later on, I mean, there's another example in Ireland, in ancient Ireland texts. It talked about the roving bands of guys who go around and do stuff, and there's a king king in waiting, like an heir, and he joins one of these wolfing bands, and they go around and rob and do kind of like, I won't say murder, but they certainly go around and nick stuff and that kind of stuff. So semi-organized gang, sort of. But then when he becomes a king, he says, well, no, you have to stop your wolfing behavior. And of course they don't. So he says, well, you know what that means? I'm going to have to take you out. So, but it's literally written there where the son of Dondessa says, please stop your wolfing behavior. It's there in the ancient text. So it's this kind of transition, and which brings us, of course, to the Ulfhednar and the berserkers of Norse myth, and they're the kind of last gasp of this being a positive thing in society, where you have people who are. Here's my take on the whole thing with them being. I think initially it was just people who are very, very, very good swordsmen.
Right. Okay.
Or fighters or whatever. Now, if imagine, a lot of people were quite good swordsmen, but if a king is rich enough, he, like Harold Finehair says, I'll tell you what, you're a sailor and you're a farmer. Don't do that. I'll pay you. Train all day. You don't need to train a bit at the end of the day, at the beginning or whatever. Now imagine it's like the equivalent of like being pub league, where the guys can play on a weekend, or the guys can train all week. Now they're playing the same game, but you're going to be phenomenally better. Even if somebody's the best pub league striker you've got, compared to somebody in the Premier League, they're going to wipe the floor with you. And there's accounts of them saying, oh, well, I couldn't lay a finger on him. I couldn't cut him. But was it that they couldn't cut him, as in they just couldn't get near him because he's so good?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but again,
Yeah.
they take on.
So this is I can see like the beginnings of the myth
Yes.
around,
But they were being
all of
mythologized
this.
at the
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
Oh, my guy's a 10-foot tall. Oh, they turn to wolves. Oh, they do this kind of stuff. So there's all that kind of wolfy stuff around them. And there's a theory that there was 3 kinds of these sort of berserkers, potentially. Now, this is the evidence is thin, so we've got to be careful with this. But there's the wolf guys who wear wolf pelts, which are actually quite tough. They're pretty good, sort of light armor because the skins are quite tough. And somebody's mentioned the Varangian guards. I'm getting there. Wait for me. Which are great. Then you have the berserkers, the berserker. So depending on your build, imagine you're like a average build, or you can be one of the wolf guys. You can run in as a pack and attack, or maybe you're a big heavy set guy. Well, I'm not going to go running. Okay, just give you a gigantic stick, and no matter how good somebody's technique is, you just batter them. But right, maybe you're a shorter guy. You said, well, I can't. Well, what you do is you're heavily armed, and you just go in slowly, and just as a like a, and they were called I forgot the name of it, but they were linked to boars. That kind of like heavily armed, because people often think with boars, they're just like pigs. They're incredibly dangerous animals. Boars are. They run very, very fast, and those tusks, they were quite dangerous animals. They're nothing like little sort of twee little piglets that you think of, But this is the thing. So, but that's the initial thing. But my other theory that goes on to that is that later on, because there's this constant warfare everywhere, you get people who are essentially suffering PTSD, right? Not necessarily warriors, but just people who've seen all their family killed or something horrific's happened. They're struggling to adapt back into society. They just can't. I just want to go kill. Just want to go kill. Okay, well, why don't you go and hang out with the berserkers? Because we don't know what's up with you. And so you get people who are just, I won't say mentally ill, but who are severely traumatized, mixed in with people who are very talented, and it gets a bit muddy then, you see.
See, it's interesting you talk about PTSD, because obviously you think about Norse and Vikings and things like that, but you never would think about PTSD because it seems a very modern concept.
But people
I get the idea that
when you think about it, if you're just a regular farmer, someone you've seen your whole family cut down, your 4 children killed or burned alive or something horrific, that's going to change the way you see the world. Even the best. I mean, maybe some people did recover, but some horrific stuff did happen, and I think that could well have fed into that. And as they become better and better, they're the shock troops at the front of the army. But of course, when they do all the conquering and there's no more really big wars to fight, what do you do with these guys? They've been training for 10 years. Go back to being a farmer. I haven't farmed in 10 years. I don't know what I'm doing. So there's then a split between these warriors. The ones who have a bit more intelligence, a bit more sharp, they go down to Istanbul, Constantinople, and become the Varangian Guard. And imagine that. You're this guy from some windswept little village up in Norway. You go down to the warmest place you've ever been in the world, where they have wine and women on tap. What do we have to do for this? Oh, just go and kill those guys over there. Fantastic. I love the sound of that. And remember, they're top of their game, and they're fighting just hired troops who are just the equivalent of squaddies versus people who've been fighting all their lives and love it. So they live a wonderful life. But what is really interesting is an account where they have a performance of the of all these different groups, and they come on and do their strange dances for the audience.
Right.
And nobody, what do you mean dances? Nobody really knows, but there's a theory or a hypothesis or a guess that maybe it might have been some kind of martial art or some kind of, not kata, but like this is...
Oh, like capybara.
If you train with a sword or like with kendo, there's a certain sort of training movements that you do. So they come on and do their training movements, and there's people who are not fighters go, oh, they're doing a dance, I guess. There's that. But then the people who don't go down there and live the life of Riley stay up here, and they essentially just become a problem. You've got guys who are highly trained, they can outfight anybody. And somebody mentioned Northmen there, which is a very funny thing. But Northmen's actually more accurate than the Vikings TV series in some things.
Oh,
genuinely. Okay. There's this bit where one of them says, "Oh, Sven, I really like your wife. She's got very beautiful. You have some beautiful children, yes, and you have wonderful lands and farm. Oh, thank you very much. So I will challenge you to a duel and take them from you." What? Which was legal. You could just challenge somebody to a holmgang, and if you won, then you've got all their stuff. And of course, this was meant to be between two people of equal skill. But if somebody, it's like somebody who's like an MMA guy challenging you to a boxing match or a wrestling match. Oh,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to
So
lose.
this becomes a problem. The Holmgams get out, and these guys are still wandering around. And then in the later sagas, the berserkers are just stock villains, so difficult, annoying people, and eventually it's outlawed. And
How to what extent did these people, these warriors, because we're thinking that obviously this links to our idea of werewolves, these people who are, like you say, kind of not ostracized, but essentially ostracized because they're kind of a problem, a difficulty. Were they, like you talked about, spiritually linked? I mean, am I right in thinking that obviously, you know, the Northmen, the Vikings, whatever term you want to give them, were very, I mean, we know they're popular in Viking culture, but did they spiritually believe
I don't think it's spiritual, but
wolves,
there's without getting too really weird, but there's a concept of fylgja and like animal spirit that follows you. It's not quite the same as the Native American stuff, but so this idea of like the collective spirit and things like that would follow you and embody you. And you could inherit that from somebody who you weren't even related to, but you had the same vibe as, you know, where somebody says like, oh, like, I don't know, like the modern day equivalent of, you know, oh, they're the next Oasis, you know, but well, they're not related and there's no shared members, but they've got the same sort of angle or whatever. That would be the sort of thing. So people would take this spiritual aspect, which again seems very weird to us, but that was the sort of angle that were coming out. So we will live like wolves. We are like a wolf pack, you know, which is cool. And if you've seen the movie The Northman, there's a point where they get ready for battle and they get drunk and go crazy and what have you. And some people complained about this, but it was actually accurate. Where they see someone, they're doing all this battle and all this kind of pre-battle stuff, this ritual, and they're getting ready to do their evil deeds. Well, not evil deed, but they're fighting next day. And they see somebody with horns on a helmet. Say, well, hang on. Surely everybody knows Vikings didn't have horns on the helmet. Well, they might have done, but only for ritual purposes, not for battle, because for battle it's a terrible idea, because you can just grab it and pull it off. And it's just, but for ritual type things, it might have been a thing, because they found a few things where it was so they weren't even the helmets and things that people have maybe found. That would never be used for war because it's not heavy enough, it's not strong enough. So it might have been some kind of symbolic thing that they were doing. And there's another even more obscure theory that they would put a sort of a numbing cream on their arms, which, you know, there's various things that grow wild that can numb your skin a little bit. So if you get cut, maybe you're not going to be, you know, you would feel it less. It's not going to make you invulnerable or anything. But one of the things you can do, if you get, I think it's Amanita muscaria, you know, they're kind of, you know, the famous little mushroom. Now they weren't getting all psychedelic, which I know I love the theory, but it's not true. But if you rub that on your skin, I literally was speaking to somebody 2 days ago, and they said, "Oh, you know, they actually made it." I said, all right, and they said it feels like your arms are getting hairier.
Really?
They don't look as if they are, but
that's amazing. Okay,
your arms are getting hairier. That's a very interesting. And you can see these little things that are coalescing.
I was going to ask about this whole idea of a human transforming, the whole physical transformation into a wolf thing, and where does that come from?
I can tell you exactly. The oldest version of this is in a sort of proto novel from the Roman era called the Satyricon, which is quite a funny sort of knock. It's meant to be this guy who's starts off as a slave and he's kind of, you know, done his thing and end up getting freed and made a lot of money, and he's meant to be like new money in the worst ways. Like it's awful, not awful, but like, oh, I did all this kind of stuff. Well, my master wanted me to sleep with him. Well, I wasn't into that, but you know, I knew I could get my freedom if I played along, so fair enough. And it's always, but it's literally written like that. And there's a little sub bit in that where somebody tells a story within the story about this legionary who takes all his clothes off and runs off into the forest when somebody's walking with him. What's all that about?
As you do.
Well, nothing to do with that. But then when he comes back, then there's reports the next day there's been this big wolf been attacking people's sheep and stuff, and this guy like attacked it, cut its leg, and it ran off. The next day they notice the legionary has a cut on his leg in the same place. So he's physically. But this is a story of somebody physically transforming. This is not mythology, or this is a thing that. So it's a. Was this just a story that was always being told around, or was it, you know, that's the classic sort of guy literally physically turns into a wolf. That's the earliest one that is really, other than a god going, "You have displeased me, you shall be a dog forever," or whatever, that kind of stuff. But so this is that's a really interesting one. I think 2nd century, something like that.
So you obviously have that story. I mean, I also get, because you kind of briefly mentioned the whole idea of the full moon, very much linked to soldiers fighting by the light of the moon, so they can see their way and things like that. What about other myths surrounding werewolves? You know, silver bullets.
I know exactly where that's
the
from.
hell did that come
exactly
from?
Where that's from. I was skipping ahead a little bit here, but I know we have limited time. But well, actually, no. Before I get to it, I'll just tell you that the whole French werewolf thing is really interesting, because there was a werewolf panic in the kind of 13th, 14th century France. There were werewolves everywhere. Oh my goodness! But when you look at the accounts, you say, well, that's not a werewolf. That's just a serial killer. That's just a terrible person. So there was an account of this boy or teenager attacking women and biting them and stuff like that and being crazy. And they didn't have a name for that. He said, well, he's not doing it to steal stuff, and he's not doing them to sexually assault them. What is that? And some local guy who had a bit more knowledge was, oh, well, I know what this is. He's clearly a werewolf. It's just a... But what's interesting is that he must have been so ill that even at the time they didn't execute him. He needs. They just put him in like whatever the equivalent of like an asylum or whatever was then. Even then they were going like, he's not. But then later, other cases are much more lurid, and there's cases of people like being made into, or turn themselves into werewolves to kind of steal things, and so it becomes this malevolent kind of thing. Really, it's all evil now at this point, and there's a particular this advocate who analysed all these cases in the 15th century. He said, "Well, I've figured out there's 3 ways to become a werewolf," and he probably dined out on this for the rest of his life. He said, 3 ways to become a werewolf. 1, you get bitten by another werewolf, which begs the question, who bit that werewolf and where did that... All right, chicken and egg. But the second one was, you get a special ointment and rub it on you and become the werewolf. All right.
Right.
And the third one is, you're just so evil, you just turn into one. That's
It's a very medieval way of kind of seeing the world.
You're a self-starter. You stick-to-itiveness. That's it. And there's a great book by Sabine Baring-Gould. You can get it. I think it's long out of copyright. It's fantastic. It has all these little accounts. And there's one of this horrific criminal who'd done these horrific crimes. So gross, I won't talk about them here. And they were so gross at the time, they burned the records after he'd been convicted.
Oh,
bloody
hell.
And they said, "Why have you done all this?" He said, "I'm a werewolf." And he just sat there in his clothes. "You don't look especially werewolfy." "Oh no, this is what werewolves do. We do these terrible things." So at this point, it's like a synonym for serial killer, just a crazy person who does crazy things, not for financial gain, just because they're just into it and evil. Okay, so that's the werewolf thing. But the last little bit of that, and this is where the silver bullet thing comes in. Same in France, much later, is the Beast of Gévaudan, which was this thing was attacking people, and this is genuine. It may have killed up to 80 people in France.
Jesus.
And they couldn't kill it. It seemed to be unkillable, and it was shooting, we can't kill it. And it was attacking things, and it just seemed to be unkillable. And eventually, some nobleman comes from Paris with his kind of sidekick, sort of hunter sort of guy, and they kill it. And it's taken back to Paris and kind of stuffed and put on display. It's stuffed badly, so nothing remains, unfortunately. It was probably, according to some other recent studies, probably a female lion that somebody had as a pet that escaped. And lion skin's really tough. And most of the guns that people had in rural Renaissance France or whatever it was, they're not going to have the stopping power. It's not like they've got a high projectile rounds. So it's not that it was impervious. They're just guns for crap. They would kill a person, but to a big lion, you're wasting your time. It was only when a guy from Paris who has a very expensive, properly drilled bore, he takes it down. Okay, that's fine. And the bullet was blessed by a priest. They're all very blessed, but that was all. But a few years later, somebody writes a journal article or like a newspaper thing, just sort of like, "Oh, remember that weird case from years ago? It was a silver bullet, Just made it up.
That's fantastic.
But because silver is curative, it genuinely is. You can get elastoplast with bits of silver in now. But he just put it in there. So yes, it was silver, and everybody ran with it. It's just, nobody thought to check because silver doesn't make a good bullet because it's soft. It's a soft metal. It's a terrible idea for a bullet. You want something that's hard.
See, I find it fascinating how a story, essentially, a made-up story, where somebody just ran with it.
There's a lot of that.
Is now part of popular culture.
I mean,
around werewolves.
The thing about the berserkers and those sort of people being on psychedelic drugs, which is a cool idea. Not true. They might, and then this is really thin. They might have taken it the night before, or night after, as a kind of come down ritual. But if you've ever done any kind of physical activity like sport or football or anything like that, do you think you'd be more effective or less effective if you were really drunk? Probably. You probably want to be sober for that. So you think, I can't imagine you being better at something that requires like accuracy and skill if seeing bizarre shapes in the clouds, and I don't think that's but
And I just wanted to ask as well, because obviously all we've talked about, obviously a lot of the werewolf thing has come from soldiers, and that's where it stems from. What about has there been any connection with wolves and women, or is it purely wolves and men?
But again, so this is there is some female werewolves when they turn up, generally are much later on, but there's female werewolf in one of the Norse sagas, the Germanic sagas, where there's a female werewolf who's unnamed, who eats a prisoner every night. And Sigurd's mother, she's unnamed, and she turns into this big wolf and eats a prisoner every night. And one guy, he's about to be eaten by but he's got some advice. What you do is cover your face in honey. All right? And the wolf is about to eat him and starts to lick him. And he bites the tongue and holds the tongue of the wolf so he can get it and kind of attack it. And that kind of pins it there. And that kind of thing. So there's that one, but there's also the Greek goddesses and their links to wolves and stuff like that. Diana, of course, with their wolves and things like that. And we mentioned Apollo. And so there is multiple things. It's a pet theory, or not even a theory, it's a hypothesis, which I cannot prove. But my suspicion is that when we talked about that kind of male group going outside the village, doing all that kind of stuff, I think in that early time there was a female thing happening. Female wolf, well, you have to learn, you'd be taught life as a pubescent female, adolescent female, you'd be taught like life rights, like what happens when somebody dies, what happens when somebody gives birth, what do you do? All that kind of stuff, and which herbs will help somebody if they've got a cut. Because any mention of Greek goddesses and Roman goddesses that are to do with wolves, it's all to do with potions and poisons.
Right, okay.
And well, drugs in the broadest sense, I will say. So I think that's a sort of like a little filtering down memory of, because at this point in history, drugs, medicine, and magic are exactly the same thing. There is no there's not a separate role. So I think that's my take on it. But as society gets more structured, that female version kind of just ends up being lost along the way.
I was going to say, how difficult is it to separate the kernels of truth from myth? Because it must be almost impossible, isn't it?
Well,
because
I think
there must be dual meanings in
context
language and things.
And because context is really important. So, for example, the people like to talk, because if you think of like people now, if we talk about, let's say, in terms of euphemism and language, there's things that people know, right? That people say, oh, it was like a fantasy tavern. And you know exactly, you've got a picture in your head of what a fantasy sword and sorcery tavern is. You know exactly what that is. 1,000 years from now, and somebody was fantasy tavern, what was this, some kind of erotic place? Or what do they mean by fantasy? Whose fantasy? And suddenly the context gets lost. And you have to remember that even if it says something in black and white, what did they mean by that? Or was it something that everybody would get? There's that kind of... there's a famous kind of, not even a werewolf story, where somebody's writing down a history. Oh, and then this person recounted the history of so-and-so and so-and-so. But everybody knows that, so I won't repeat it here.
Got it. Yeah.
So there's that.
It's like common knowledge for the time.
For the time. Yeah, possibly. Or people would know that, oh, well, what that really means is this, I mean, people 1,000 years now, people say, was Batman real? Was an awful lot of evidence that he was. We've got people dressing up as him. We've got movies, we've got stories, Was he real? It's hard to know. With Gotham, was Gotham a place? Well, there's a few places. You know, 1,000 years from now, whatever's left of our culture, people are going to be like, well, was he real? Well, maybe there was a guy, but you could see somebody as a historian trying their best to kind of sift through little fragments and to try to work out, was he real? Who made it up? Was it made up? You know.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of, I've heard you mention as well, and this goes a little bit away, I suppose, from werewolves,
sure.
essentially, but you'll have to explain it to me. The fact of Christian dog-headed men.
Oh, now you're talking. Now you're talking.
What
We need,
what
we
are we talking
need
about?
another
What is going
podcast
on?
just for that. But very briefly, this is kind of like a parallel thread to werewolves. It is and it isn't, right? Essentially, there was this, where this really begins. There's a great book called Mysteries of the Dogmen by Gordon White, but essentially there was this text called the Romance of Alexander. Now, I mean romance in the oldest word, as in the Adventures of Alexander, is what it really means, right? And this goes all around Europe, getting translated from Latin, because that's what everybody reads, but they're translated into local language, and then the next country along. And every time it gets retranslated, it kind of gets a bit more wacky, and a bit more lurid, and a bit more weird. There's more monsters, and suddenly there's people with no heads, and people have like faces in the middle of their stomach, and there's more dog-headed men, and there's the dog-headed men becomes this thing. And it's a bit of this thing about far away in another land we've never been to, there are dog-headed men. Okay. Now, is this people, travelers going there and seeing baboons and monkeys go, what's that? Oh, that's one of the dog-headed men. And they're just making fun of them. And the traveler goes, oh, okay, write that down. Dog-headed men, gotcha, right? So they're like people. I mean, all right, if you like, you know. So that confusion. Or is it some kind of early version of racism where people who don't look like you, they're kind of dog-headed, they're kind of weirdos and all that kind of stuff. So the whole dog-headed men it's a much later thing, but it's really interesting because the dog-headed men, there's like various early Greek sort of historians or geographers talk about all the countries and places. But there is some wild stories about the dog-headed men around. My favorite one is actually from an apocryphal gospel. I think it's the Acts of Matthew amongst the Parthians, if I remember rightly, where some apostles are trying to convert this city and they can't, and they're twiddling their thumbs. We can't. It's not working out. And then this dog-headed cannibal man rocks up, and they're all a bit, what's this? And he says, no, I heard a voice in the sky telling me not to be a cannibal anymore, and I should give you a hand. Wow, God sent us like a sidekick. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And all kinds of things happen, and it's a wild story. It's great. And there's a bit where they're inside the city where they're trying to convert to Christianity, and they're all about to be attacked. And they look at this dog-headed dude who's like a big, tough warrior guy. Please help us. He's, no, I promised the God in the sky, the voice in the sky, I wouldn't do anything. And then the voice is going, obviously tells him, no, go beast mode, basically. And he literally, well, I mean, okay, I'm paraphrasing, but that's more or less the tenor of what he says. No, you have my permission. Let's go. So he kills men, women, children, beasts. He's the absolute Tasmanian devil on everyone. And the people are, we're going to convert to Christianity. This is fine. And somebody's mentioned the cynocephaly. Yes. I've got a little blog where I mentioned some of that. And but then because it's a Christian gospel, then they convert to Christianity. He brings everyone back to life again. So but so the cynocephaly is this thing about the dog-headed people, and there's Egyptian gods with dog heads as well. Wepawet, the opener of the ways and things like that. And there's various other things. Now, the interesting thing about, we've heard about the dog-headed saint.
No, I've not heard of the dog-headed saint. No, go on.
Yeah,
go on.
Dog-headed saint. Why was he a dog-headed saint? Because people translated something badly.
Really?
He was a Canaanite, and somebody meant
Canaanite.
He was from Canaan, but Canaanite, somebody mistranslated the Canaan. So for years,
that's amazing.
The dog-headed saint, and so he was a dog, and for eventually the Catholic Church was like, you're wrong, please stop now. But in the Greek Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox, it was still being, you can find these icons, with the dog-headed saint on. So there's that. So, but the whole dog-headed men is a fascinating sort of thing, because are they actually? Is it just some kind of curdled, nasty version of racism? These people are ugly, or is it warriors wearing like literal dog heads, that kind of stuff? There's a mention in the Odyssey where they fight these dog-headed soldiers in what is modern day Serbia in one of the editions. So there's all kinds of references to these dog-headed men, and they're always men usually. So that is a really interesting. But I mean, the dogmen is, but they never called them werewolves. They seem to be like a separate thing for whatever reason. Yeah.
Have you ever actually? I mean, I'm going to go into questions in a second that people may have for you, if that's okay. But obviously, you've kind of looked and had this interest in kind of Norse culture and things around werewolves. Has anything more recent kind of piqued your interest? With modern werewolf stories, because there are some out there.
There's a lot. I won't say I'm skeptical, but I'm always like thinking, because obviously our eyes are in our eyewitness accounts, unfortunately, are super unreliable. I wish they weren't. People have done tests to say that they're unreliable. So I'm not saying that these things aren't out there, all these weird things people have seen. And I've spoken to people who've said that they were on a particular road and they saw this thing. And these are sane people. They're not, and they've told me they've seen very strange things. But then you must think about there's older things than werewolves. There's things like woodwows. Woodwows is kind of
what?
Woodwo is this kind of hairy, weird guy of the forest. Is the very TLDR version, right?
Okay.
It's this hairy sort of dude who just, is it a hermit? Is it a spirit? Just some guy who lives out in the forest, who's like, a forest spirit, but like an old guy with a big beard, that kind of stuff. Not a tramp, nothing like that. Not like kind of like an unhoused person, but also he's mentioned dog soldiers. Interesting about dog soldiers, about a decade before that came out, a friend of mine was doing a film project at Sunderland University, and he said, "Oh, it's this guy I've met," and I don't remember, was this the actual director? I don't know. He said, "The guy I've met, he wants to do a movie up in the hills about squaddies versus werewolves." And I remember at the time thinking, that sounds rubbish. No, I want nothing to do with it. How wrong I was. But I would say one of my...
it'd have to be the director.
Well, I don't know. He doesn't remember telling me it. So I was like, well, no, you told me you were at the university. But yeah. Romulus and Remus. I can quickly tell you about the Romulus and Remus. My take on Romulus and Remus and the Capitoline wolf, where you see the two babies suckling under the wolf. Thing is, the big thing, the most surprising thing, the Capitoline wolf, really small. You think that you've seen the picture of the statue, the little carving. You think, it's going to be about 6. No, it's about yay big, like that sort of size. It's about like a foot and a half across tops. So it's quite small. But my take on that is that this is mythology telling a story that it's got distorted. So my take on that is that Romulus and Remus are part of some tribal group, and they get kicked out or they leave for whatever reason. And there's this other tribe who take them in, which is matriarchal, run by some woman, and they're all into the wolf symbolism. So thereafter, it's like, oh, what happened to them? Oh, they're suckling, suckling the teats of the wolf. Oh, that's what happened to them.
So it's essentially a metaphor.
Because that's the thing, because people like metaphors now and then. People weren't stupid then. They would tell stories, and it's no good thinking that they were literalists. You have to think that they loved a good story and they like to have metaphor and description and things as well.
One last thing before I go on to questions. I've heard you mention before something which I've never ever heard of before: a werewolf. What on earth is going on with a werewolf? Because that's a new one on me.
Norse saga, Kettle saga, where very briefly a shaman, magic man, whatever you want to call it, is able to control a very large fish. So, or make it do something for him. So he doesn't physically turn into it, but he's able to manipulate it and that kind of stuff. So that's about, although I did this on the Norse mythology podcast, and my teenager found this clip and has memed me, made me into a YTP, and has me repeatedly just going, the whale, the whale, The werewolf. The werewolf. She thought I'd be upset. I thought, that's brilliant. Upload it.
Was that? I mean, was that like a part of a wider concept though, in terms of like getting into the mindset of a wild
Yes,
animal?
absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
like thinking that they could control or
Control
vice
that
versa.
kind of, yeah, it's that kind of, it's fuzzy because our what survives is very thin, so you have to really kind of read between the lines and be prepared to be wrong about this kind of stuff, about like manipulating animals and that kind of stuff. And I'm always hesitant to speculate too much about what people, because an awful lot of it is what people claim they can do, what they can't do, and what they can do. I'm reminded of a passage in a particular novel where this guy has to, it's set in the Viking era, it's a fantasy-ish. Was this bit where they, first of all, they have to go and rescue their holy man, you know, their guy. And he's been, because the king doesn't want to kill him, he says, well, what we'll do is we'll chain him up on a rock and we'll let the sea kill him. So we haven't, it's not up to us. I mean, okay.
Yeah.
It's bad luck to kill a holy man, right? So, but what, they rescue him. And he says, oh, and he catches a seagull and kills it and cuts its foot off and puts that in the ankle chain. And he's, what's that? Oh, they'll think I turned myself into a seagull and escaped. And said, you can do that? Well, they don't know that. It's better that they think I can. So there's a bit of that. So I think there's always a bit of like, you know, creative license, because people were just as cunning then as they are now. They didn't have the technology. They weren't stupid, but they had skills and abilities and storytelling and, you know, the whole variety of human experience.
Absolutely. Right. Gone to the first
yes.
question. One here from Gingy67 said there have been fictional stories about wild men being abandoned and raised by wolves. Is there any actual cases of this happening? As wolves are predators, I would have thought they would have been eaten.
There are a few cases of children being raised by wolves from a very young age, not being eaten. However, they're kind of tragic because the ones who are rescued, I think it was one in India in the 19th century, I think, but past a certain, if they're rescued early enough, they can go back to being human again. But if they go past a certain stage, the boy who was rescued never learned to speak. He was just in that kind of feral kind of thing. But a more recent case was in Russia, where this kid, his parents were awful and, you know, didn't really care for him, and the other kids didn't like him. So he used to hang around with this pack of wild dogs as a little kid, and he would sleep with them and hang out with them. And they interviewed him. He says years later, what was it like? He said, well, he struggled to remember, but he says, you know, it was like just hanging around with them, just being with them. He couldn't really explain, he couldn't really put into words what it meant to kind of like be with the dogs as opposed to being with humans. So, but there's that crossover threshold where you haven't developed language, then you can't really go back. It's very difficult to kind of, because your pathways become more hardened, but it's very difficult to kind of lay down new things.
Yeah. Catherine Lawrence is saying, what is the first recorded incident of what we would think of today as a werewolf?
Well, that's a very open question. Like, it depends what you mean by what we think of today as a werewolf. There's various, there's the most celebrated case, I think, would be Peter Stub, also Peter Stump, and various other spellings. But this is a recorded case where this guy was going out and killing people as a werewolf. Well, he said he was a werewolf. And it was this massive, but again, essentially, it was all werewolf stuff. He's the werewolf, and there's pictures of these lurid things of him on his hands and knees and biting people. He was just a serial killer. But it's more than likely that people are confusing this whole werewolf stuff with stuff like humans catching rabies, being all frothy at the mouth, being very ill. They can't talk to them, and they're, you know, very sad. But it could well have been that, and that getting jumbled up with things as well.
One here from Beardo. He's saying, what is your favorite werewolf movie, and why is it an American Werewolf in London?
My favorite one that I've seen so far is Brotherhood of the Wolf. It's a French. Highly recommended. Highly recommend it. It's almost like you get so much story, so much stuff's in it. It's stuffed to the gills. It's pre-revolutionary France, so there's all that kind of intrigue. There's a bit of like, you know, Templar type stuff. There's a guy come back from America, this French guy, because it was, a lot of America was still French then, come back with a Native American guy who does a sort of martial arts. Brilliant. So you've got martial arts in there, pre-revolutionary France, and the Beast of Gévaudan, which he's been brought in to kind of kill. And there's all kind of intrigue. It's fantastic. Tons of stuff in there. Very, very entertaining.
Fabulous. Right. There's one here from Roger. Much of what we know as modern werewolf lore was conceived by Kurt Siodmak in his screenplay for Universal's The Wolfman. Why are there not many movies based on actual lore?
I think the movie that's coming up soon by the guy who made The Northman and The Witch may well delve into that. Yeah, Robert Eggers, who, his stuff, he does try to, people get annoyed with this stuff because when he made The Witch, people said, why aren't they speaking American? He said, well, because they're colonists from Yorkshire. That's how they would have spoken, because he really strives for his historical detail as much as possible. Even though there's fantastical things happening, the fantastical things are more believable if you have the rest of it being as historically accurate. He did Nosferatu as well. I think, I hope that Robert Eggers' stuff is going to be pretty good. And I've also given some advice for free to a screenplay writer called Scar Tamaris. She was the co-writer of Color Out Space and a few other things. So she's working on something which she couldn't tell me about, but I gave her some pointers on a few little bits as she's still under NDA. So that was a TV series I think she was talking about. So hopefully that will come out as well.
What's the Mystic Mimo saying? Do you think Enkidu?
Enkidu,
where the
Gilgamesh Enkidu. Yes. That's the oldest story we have in the world. This is the Epic of Gilgamesh. I mean, maybe. I think, but again, you've got to think, what did they mean at the time by that? And it's impossible to know because it's Sumerian literature. It's very, very hard to kind of know truly what they meant. However, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, I think is a fascinating story, but it's not least because it's mentioned in Star Trek Next Generation.
There they are. There goes one from Lou Weird Fox saying, thank you for coming on. Can you, I'll kind of pronounce that first.
Richard,
that's your name.
Okay.
Can you quickly tell everyone about the Nerus Project, please? And are you going to
the Heathenry? And the Nerus Project is basically the heathen group I'm part of. Are going to buy some land and build a temple on it and make it accessible and make it a long, not just higher land, not just have a temperature, but a proper thing. And they've been doing this for a couple of years now. They've raised quite a lot of money, very, very short term. So the Nerus Project, Nerus was this, it's obviously gods of the earth and that kind of stuff. So it's to do with that. And it's separate to Astro UK. So that is what people are doing. And there's books and there's items and things for sale and things to sort of, to raise money for it, because for years people said, when are you going to build a temple, all this kind of stuff. But the thing is, people have tried in the past, and this group Astro UK, they're trying to do it seriously and legitimately, because it's not just building a temple and it's like, who maintains it? How do you get the power hooked up? All this very boring, what security cameras?
Modern.
What security cameras do you have? Because seriously, because like if scout huts are being burned down and raided for their stuff, but it's a legit thing. Or how do you charge? Is there a gift shop? I mean, I'd love that. I love a good gift shop. I don't know. It's not up to me, but But it may take another 10 years, but it's a long-term project. They've raised quite a lot already, and long may it continue. And every year there's a big event in August where they'll be raising some more money for it, and there's a huge banner and things like that. So I look forward to it.
Fabulous. Right. Lee is saying, do you think some places like the idea of the story to boost tourism? Take the Hexom Heads that adds to the Allendale wolf story to be a werewolf rather than an actual escaped wolf.
The Hexom Heads have recently rediscovered some footage of the actual account where they did the interviews with people in the 70s, and the footage was lost. They finally found, not all of it, but most of it. Finally found the footage where they talked about it. You can find it online. But the Hexom Heads and the werewolves, every town and place has some kind of, not always werewolf, but has some big dog wolf story. Because every time I've done a talk, and I think I know all the folklore about it, every time, whether it's in Scotland, whether it's in Glastonbury and all kinds of places, start to do a talk, and it was, oh, that's wonderful, loved your talk. Are you familiar with this legend? No. Right, okay, hang on, make a note of it. And there's so many little stories, and every county in England has a story about, the last wolf in England was killed here. Really? The same as the one in Cornwall? Was it the same wolf? I don't know. All right, was it the same one in Northumberland? All right, okay. And every place in Scotland has that as well. But I mean, the Allendale wolf, and I do find it massively fascinating, as to what that really means. But there's no easy answers. It's a simple one.
Yeah. XK9 is saying, wasn't the beast of, is it
Gévaudan.
Gavaldan? The first werewolf. I'm not sure how true this is.
That was a beast. It wasn't a werewolf, but it's got folded into the whole werewolf mythology and that kind of stuff. It was clearly an actual animal, not a person, but people called it a werewolf. It's been kind of, it gets mentioned in the same breath, unfortunately. Well, not unfortunately, but it does get mentioned at the same time because it's big, wolfy, and scary, basically.
Yeah. There was somebody saying, did you like the TV show Being Human?
Yes, great fun stuff. Although my favorite part was where there's this very, very creepy vampire played by Jason Watkins, who's a severely underrated actor. Jason Watkins. He's been in everything from, he plays an incredibly sinister vampire, but he's also been in Nativity, the films. So he's been he has range. But where he's this guy who's this vampire, and he's made all the people in a police station his kind of like slaves. So this person gets arrested and go, what's going on? All the police just like stood around. It's like little sort of under his thrall, which is, and he's
fabulous. Is there, I mean, obviously I've only got a couple of minutes before we finish, but for anybody who's fascinated either in werewolf folklore or Scandinavian folklore for that matter around werewolves, is there particular good books that you would recommend people kind of look into?
So I would say if you want your best book on werewolves, affordable or free, is Sabine Baring-Gould. Right, find his book. It's free. It's online. It's great. It's wonderful. That's great. There's another one by, I think, Adam Douglas called The Beast Within. The Beast Within. That's a big tome, covers a lot of the good points there. That's really, really good. Highly recommend that one, The Beast Within. For the more, if you want to go really deep, if you're somebody who likes a good footnote. Now, know you're in too deep when you go, oh, this has got footnotes on every page. Good. This is that's when you know you've crossed the line there. But I mean, that's the state I'm in. But there's a book called The One-Eyed God, which talks about some really deep sort of lore about wolf cults and things like that. But on the more serious wolf side, there's a book called Of Wolves and Men by Barry Lopez. It's a sort of naturalist, sort of like he was like he wrote a number of books, but Of Wolves and Men, it's a classic book. It's never been out of print. You can probably pick up a hardback for less than $5. That's a classic book. Really, really good. Just talk about how humans have interacted with wolves over the centuries. Excellent one. And yeah.
And I was just going to say, if there's anybody who would like to get hold of you or talk to you, whether they've got.
Well, I'm on Instagram.
How can they get hold of you?
Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So if you see anything with called Of Wolf and Man Book, that'll be me. Just Of Wolf and Man Book, or I think on Twitter I had to take out the D because the name was too. But Of Wolf and Man Book, something like that. That'll be me. But so I'm happy to answer questions. I can't answer all of them. I can't tell you how to become a werewolf. I've had a few emails like that. Oh my goodness. But but I've got all kinds of interesting texts and links I can send people and recordings of other talks and things. So yes, feel free to get into touch, please.
And just to finish, is there a werewolf story either that you particularly enjoy, whether it's bizarre or dark or unusual, that you particularly enjoy or hearing about or read about?
Well, I'm going to say one that people here might not have heard of is Bisclavret.
I've definitely never heard of that.
Bisclavret is a story about a guy who gets tricked into being stuck as a werewolf by his wife. Written by a woman called Marie de France. Bisclavret. There's various versions all over Europe, but Bisclavret. There's another one called The Lay of Melion, but Bisclavret. 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 There you go. And nobody knows what the word Bisclavret means. But no, generally they don't. But that's the title of it. Bisclavret. There you go.
Fabulous. Great. Just want to say just a huge thank you tonight, Rich.
Happy to come back.
It's been absolute
We can do
pleasure.
a whole thing on dogmen if you like.
Oh God, yeah. If the more bizarre, the better. I know that your knowledge of this is just superb.
The other thing we can talk about
is so much.
Viking zombies.
Oh, is that a thing?
Well, no spoilers, but yes.
That's That's a whole other
Indeed,
hour.
but I'm just going to leave it there.
Could
So
definitely
there's a
do.
little teaser for another time. Viking zombies. Yeah.
Oh, we'll definitely have to
And
bring
we'll say
you on
that
for
if
Viking
I've missed anything
zombies.
out, we'll say we've barely scratched the surface. There's tons of stuff I've left out. So yes, thank you very much for everyone who's listened and seen all these comments, and I love to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just thank you so much. And I tell you now, I will have to book you in for Viking zombies because that's got to be a
Viking
thing.
zombies. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much again, Rich. And like I say, thank you for coming in last minute and saving me with this really fascinating chat. So
Wonderful.
thank you so much. Thank you. Right, I'll speak to you soon. Cheers. Thanks very much. Thank you. Right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. That was obviously Rich Blackett. Check him out, please, because and just a fantastic, really interesting talk. So there we go. In a nutshell, all the origins of werewolf can be pretty much explained. So thank you, Kaza. I did say obviously live because the guest was talking, but thank you so much for your memberships, and Ghost Ween of the donations. Bless you. Thank you so much as well. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed it. Phew. Right. I'm going to look up Viking zombies. Going to get Rich on to talk about zombies in the future. It's going to happen. Right. Enjoy the rest of your evening, guys. Make sure, please, in about half an hour or so, I think Seg, Side Eye Guy, is going to be going live, I think, in about half an hour's time. So make sure you go over to Seg, or not, because it's Seg at the end of the day. Hope you enjoyed that. Please, if you enjoyed this evening and you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do share it out. And like I say, if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. It really does help the channel massively. Thank you to everybody watching, and I shall see you again next Monday. All right. Good night, guys.